Proportional Response, Book 1. Chapter 14, Part 3, From Slave to Pirate. Hannibal sat and held Vashna's hand while waiting patiently for John, the enigmatic accountant and former pirate, in the employ of the Duke, to say something. The man's voice came out soft, even hesitant, but with an angry hardness somewhere in the mix.
I was born on HFY, a world on the far side of human space that is registered with the Council as 12,990-330, a Class 12 death world with no sapient life which the Council deemed unworthy of even the occasional scientific visit. It also, as I learned this morning, after Her Grace Euro looked it up, is not officially registered by the Council as having been colonized.
Hannibal felt his eyebrows shoot up in surprise, and he turned to Henry as words tumbled forth.
They what? Henry, how could your people do that? Council law,
Euro interrupted him,
has an interesting grey area.
Kasler waved her down.
That is not, I don't think, relevant to the matter at hand.
He then turned to John and gestured with his glass.
Please, continue.
John cleared his throat, took a sip from his whiskey, and spoke.
It was one of the early worlds that humanity colonized, supposedly things that were good for some time. I remember hearing, growing up, how great things had been before the old leaders came to our world. They were a bunch of men and women who had been major world leaders, the oldest, back before humanity had even established a base on the moon. They had, of course, been among the first humans to receive longevity treatments, and so are still around. They swept through our political arena like a storm, with promises to use their vast wisdom and many connections to the rest of human space to remake HFY into a glorious gem of human achievement, to rival the greatness of Earth itself.
John paused, sighed, and took a hit of his whiskey.
Understand that the things I am telling you now are probably not entirely correct, and maybe a little disjointed. These were dark whispers from my childhood, furtively mumbled behind closed doors in darkened rooms for fear that the speaker would be reported.
Hannibal shifted in his seat, and Vashna tightened her grip on his hand as Henry leaned forward with a disturbed look on his face. He knew, well, how seriously Henry took freedom of speech, to the point that one of the few major points of disagreement was that the Empire was still willing to crack down on certain things, like pictures of the royal children before a certain age, even if they weren't really the royal children. John seemed to ignore everyone as he continued.
Few of us, except those in the highest strata of our solar system, ever knew who they were. These people did not run for office themselves, nor rise directly in our companies. No, they worked quietly, in the background, peddling influence and favors to the point that these things became the real currency of HFY, and Confederated credits became the change used by chumps. For a while, it even went well. Companies who worked with the old leaders' contacts got great deals, bringing in credits which we used to buy tech and machines to bootstrap our economy. Jobs were plentiful, wages high, and credit flowed freely. No one noticed the nooses being lowered from the ceiling. Schools began to fall by the wayside. Why go to school when you can take out a loan and buy your own ship? Start your own business? Strike off prospecting? The years required grew less and less, and the teaching of certain things, my elders wouldn't even whisper what those things were, dwindled and stopped. Then the noose lowered. Those freely offered lines of credit, they came with steep penalties. Late for a day, your payment now was half penalty and half payment. Can't make the larger payment to cover the fee? No problem, it will be added to the principal. Miss a payment? Well, that has racked up daily fees, but we can work it out. You will still have to pay, of course, but here are the new terms. Just sign. Yes, the agreement has changed a little. Don't worry about all those extra pages, we just want to make sure everything is spelled out clearly. Oh yes, the new interest is variable. Didn't you check your new contract? Well, that is unfortunate. Sadly, our evaluation of your business makes it clear that you will not be able to pay at the current interest rates. So we are seizing your business and all of its asset. Wait, where are you going? You are listed under the company assets, right here. See? I'm afraid that we're going to have to invoke the indentureship clause of your contract. Oh, don't look so glum, chum. You will still get to keep doing just what you are doing. I mean, It isn't like you were handling the business badly, you just had a run of bad luck. Of course, you will not be making any actual wage, but we will see to it that your room and food are covered. Here is the address and number for your new home. What? You have a home? Oh no, that is part of the contract too, and is being seized as we speak to go against your debt. Yes, we know that your indentureship contract specified a certain number of years, but you see, you have racked up quite a bit of debt while you have been with us. I mean, the rent and food alone are enough for a new full contract, not to mention the performance penalties for various small things. Also, one other minor note. We will no longer require your services to run the company you started. The young man you have been training, the son of some wealthy person, yes, we feel he is quite able to take the company over. Fortunately, we have a great place we can put you on one of the mining asteroids, don't you fret. Their mortality rate is down under 10% these days. You'll be fine. Now just sign here.
John paused and took his wine in a gulp, then turned to pour himself some more. He also poured himself a glass of water, and when he turned back to them had both glasses in his hand. He alternated between them as he continued.
I never really knew my parents. I was a toddler when their debts were called due and I was separated from them. Thankfully, my grandfather was a pensioner at that point and had managed to stay out of trouble, for that was another way they'd get you. I knew one man who'd ended up, through devices much like I just described, working switchgrass fields after being caught jaywalking. It took a few years for them to get him from that point, of course, but you either had the connections to stay free, made them, or they got you sooner or later. Anyway, my grandfather was able to take me in and did his best to raise me. He was elderly though, and had a tough time keeping up with a toddler and even worse with a child. At one point I slipped out during the day, was caught, and brought back by a constable. I'd been afraid Grandpa would be furious with me, but he only looked at me with tears in his eyes that I didn't understand until years later. He'd been trying to tell me, trying to teach me how bad it was in the world, and that it had once been different, but I'd been a child unprepared to pay attention and too busy feeling the loss of my parents.
He stopped and looked up at the wall for a moment.
Funny, I don't even remember their faces anymore. I have no pictures of them. No possessions from back then, actually.
He shook himself and continued.
They installed monitoring systems in Grandfather's home, at his expense of course, and forced him to enroll me in public schooling, at my expense, I found out later.
Henry shot up ramrod straight in his chair.
That is expressly illegal. Primary education is required, and charging for it is a serious offense under the Confederated Worlds Charter.
John's face went from slightly melancholy to hard as a rock as he turned a piercing stare on Henry.
Tell it to the Halistafar legislature. Anyway, that was how they got so many of the kids like me who had slipped through their cracks. There is a test when you finish your education given by a computer. If you pass it, then your educational debt is discharged. The only kids who ever passed it were the children of parents with a lot of pull. I'd learned the lessons from my grandfather too late, but I learned them. Trust no one, keep your head down, learn what you can. He'd taught me what he could: programming, hacking, accounting, how to fight, how to hide. He figured out how to defeat the listening devices in his apartment and did what he could. Until they figured it out, of course, then they pulled me out and put me in a workhouse. Having to work to earn my keep made school harder, of course, but I didn't much care. I was already so far ahead of everyone else in my classes, it was laughable. Testing day finally came, and I managed to do it right. Scored high enough to prove useful at something other than manual labor to whomever bought my contract, but not so high, or dangerous, thanks to my lies on the psychological questions, that I was consigned to manual labor anyway. My path to piracy was long and sordid from there, full of quiet betrayals and thwarted plans. I finally ended up in a position on a small asteroid. Had another man there, as close to a friend as I ever had, who was like me. Smart enough to hide his intelligence, crafty enough to not be noticed. We bided our time, and finally managed to frame one of our fellows, a ratfink who got himself extra rations and perks by informing on his fellows, for murdering a security guard. This brought an armed patrol ship to pick him up, and we struck. It was fast, efficient, brutal, and ended up with us and our fellow slaves. Yes, slaves. That is what they start to call you after a while on an armed ship. My buddy ended up as captain, Folks liked him better than me. We also had an excellent computer slicer with us. He'd actually been indentured because of real computer crimes. Of course, he'd done those crimes to try to get his siblings out of debt, but that is another story. The patrol ship was strictly sublight. Almost everything in that system is, they don't like outsiders. We went on a tear through the system, wrecking and pillaging anything we could. Through craft, computer hacking of schedules, guile, and a little luck, we managed to trade up ships several times and grow our crew. Whenever we took a civilian ship, and we took a lot, we would kill the free men, who were basically slavers, and let the others either join us or be quietly dropped off somewhere with enough population that they could try to get lost in the crowd. After a while, we started seeing plants on ships from the government. Spies intended to take us down. The captain, though, he was crafty and paranoid and could spot them. If he was sure, they went out an airlock. If he wasn't, they got dropped off with those who didn't want to join. We wreaked hell through the system, made a lot of noise, and always stayed one step ahead of the law. Then we finally managed our big score. We captured one of the rare interstellar traders with their FTL drive intact. Captain wouldn't let us kill any of them. We got him at first by pretending to be a patrol, so there wasn't even a fight.